Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of My Favorite Builds. This is one of the earliest characters that I created, and he's not perfect, so don't judge him too harshly. But his name is GGM_Convicter, and of course he is a Vengeance Paladin. Specifically, a Vengeance Paladin. What is a Vengeance Paladin, and how the hell do they work? Well, to be honest with you, the skill Vengeance is so confusing that my road to discovery on how Vengeance worked was literally one fraught with terror and horror throughout the 9 realms. I came across so many various things that do not work with Vengeance. Grief doesn't work with Vengeance. Freaking enhanced damage doesn't work with Vengeance. Elemental damage really doesn't work with Vengeance either, because the way that Vengeance works is you need the highest, biggest, strongest physical damage weapon that you possibly can, and Grief isn't it, because Grief doesn't work with Vengeance. So you end up needing this specific weapon, which is a Breath of the Dying in a Berserker's Axe. I actually ended up with a pretty bad roll on my Berserker's Axe, but, you know, whatever. With this particular character, you're going to need a Breath of the Dying Berserker's Axe to really get the most out of Conviction. But if you don't have this, or Vengeance, but if you don't have this particular item, don't fret. You really just need the highest physical damage item that you can get at any given time. That's really all you need to know about Vengeance. With the exception of Grief, which doesn't count because the Grief effect does not work with Vengeance, you basically just need the highest physical damage weapon that you can use at any given time. Speed is also a factor here, though, because you don't want a weapon that's really, really slow. And the reason why is because Vengeance itself is actually kind of a really slow ability. It is a one-donk ability. You hit a target with it, and yeah, that target takes a lot of damage, but the problem with it is that, well, it takes a little while for you to wind up your next attack, and you need a lot of attack speed to really make this build work. Which is one of the reasons why I ended up with number 1, Breath of the Dying, which has 60% increased attack speed on it. Number 2, I ended up using Adariel's Visage with a jewel in it for 15% increased attack speed, which brought me up to 35% from this source. On top of that, I'm also utilizing a 15% increased attack speed jewel in my shield, which brings me up another 15% on top of that. And then I ended up using Guardian Angel Hellforge Plate because I liked having the very high caps on all my resistances. And as an example, when I use Salvation, you can see I'm at 95%, 95%, 95%, 93%. The resistances on this character never got fully fleshed out, but quite honestly, he was just a tankin' beefcake, though. I mean, he could literally take damage from just about anything with relative ease. On top of this, he's also utilizing a Ravenfrost, which he definitely could have had a better Ravenfrost. Do I not have like a better Ravenfrost just like sitting in here? I mean, it's been so long since I made this character, and he had like the worst Ravenfrost. But I'm pretty sure if I look in here, oh yeah, look at that beefy cake, boy. That's a 250 with 19 dexterity. Hell of a lot better than that 18 dexterity with 158. That one's awful. Another issue that you'll run into besides attack speed is also attack rating, which also comes into play. I ended up using Dracul's Grasp, not because I needed it, but just simply because when I did Ubers and stuff like that, I ended up using it for the life tap. And I did actually do Ubers a lot on this character. And I would switch to Smite during that time period. But Dracul's is actually not the correct pair of gloves for this character. I'm pretty sure. Actually, I don't even remember which gloves I used on this character. I probably stole them for another character at some point and never gave them back, which is pretty par for the course when it comes to these builds, because a lot of the times I would do just that. Flesh Ripper Fang Knife was usually sitting in my cube for smiting. I would usually use this, do a little swap 2 for smiting, specifically for that purpose. And it looks like I had a better Ravenfrost just sitting in my cube for some reason. As well as an Atma's Scarab sitting in there, too. That's strange. A bunch of weird stuff sitting in here. Take it all out. I probably put it in here just for storage space between ladder seasons or something like that. Ooh, wow, an all-res 15 jewel? Those are always nice to come by. It's a pretty decent ring there, too. 10% faster cast, 17 strength, 28 mana, all res 9. With life leech and attack rating? Well, some freaking little doojigs sitting in his little thing. But anyway, when I would smite, I would swap to Flesh Ripper and allow myself to have that damage for the Flesh Ripper. And then I'd swap back for Vengeance, because Flesh Ripper is terrible for Vengeance. I'm also using Herald of Zakarum's Shield, War Travelers, which actually gives me a huge amount of damage on my Vengeance. If you notice, I have 8,000 damage on my Vengeance right now, and when I put War Travs on, I go up to 8,431. And this is because the damage number, the 15 to 25 damage number, he's actually adding min and max. And when it comes to Vengeance, min and max damage actually gives a huge amount of damage for Vengeance. So the more min and max damage that you can potentially get, the more damage you have on your Vengeance. And so you end up stacking max damage AR charms on this particular build, as many max damage AR charms as you can get, because it just continually increases that Vengeance damage to the moon and back. And I guess I better put these back on, because I don't know exactly, I don't have any other gloves to put on this character, so I'm pretty sure they were IAS gloves, if I remember correctly. Do I have any? These have IAS on them. Let's just use these for right now, because I'm pretty sure they were increased attack speed gloves at the very least. I also ended up using Verdungo's Hardy Cord, but in retrospect, I probably would have been better off using a String of Ears for the Life Leech. It's kind of an odd scenario. If you're a smiter, Verdungo's is better. If you're a melee character that actually swings a weapon, then String tends to be better. It's kind of a back and forth on that, depending on how you want your character. I also ended up using an all-res ring on this particular character with a little bit of mana leech and attack rating. Not exactly a terrible ring all around. For charms and things like that, I ended up using mainly max damage charms for the most part. And as you can see, I'm kind of overflowing with charms here, because whenever I did Ubers, you don't need any inventory space when you're doing Ubers. So I would just shove all the charms that I possibly had onto my character, which didn't exactly, you know, doesn't exactly matter all that much. You just, it's really just a matter of, I'll pull a little bit of gold on this character so that I can store more from other characters. It's just a matter of, you know, putting them on, using them in your Ubers, and you take them off later when you're done with your Ubers. For the Mercenary, I ended up going with a Fire Merc, if I remember correctly. This was one of the first instances of me playing around with the new Fire Mercenary, and I ended up using an Ethereal Spirit Conquest Sword, an Ethereal Skin of the Viper Magi, an Ethereal Nightwing's Veil, with a amethyst in it so that he could actually equip the sword. And then also the Spirit Shield. This is also ethereal. Now, in retrospect, I would change this build, so this character no longer needs to be this. And he was ice, by the way, not fire, my bad. It would definitely be a cold facet in the helmet. K. Hagen's would have been chosen here instead of Skin of the Viper Magi. He doesn't need the resistances. And I would have done a cold facet in the K. Hagen's. And then Spirit probably still is the best choice here, as well as Spirit here. So that would be fine. Although I may have gone with a Plague Sword for the Constant Cleansing Aura, which is certainly very nice. Now, when it comes to this particular character and actually fighting, it's kind of slow. You have this massive Conviction Aura, but you pretty much just run around smacking everything with your Vengeance. And you dish out massive amounts of damage with Vengeance. But as you can see here, even with all that increased attack speed equipment, I'm still not going to be faster than, say, a Zeal Paladin or something like that. And speaking of which, let's go over the skills. So, first off, I do max out Vengeance, definitely, 20 points into Vengeance. And the synergies for Vengeance are kind of insane. There's 4 of them. And it's kind of hard to max out all of them, but we'll go over that in a little bit. I also put 20 points into Holy Shield because I really like having Max Holy Shield. You don't have to have Max Holy Shield, but I like having Max Holy Shield. The amount of defense that you get from Max Holy Shield is insane. As you can see, I'm sitting at 17,527 at the moment, which is kind of nuts. And it's pretty difficult for pretty much anything to hit me. Now, Conviction Aura is really important here, and it is all the way down at the bottom of the tree, so you're going to have to go down there. Mine is currently level 31, I'm assuming I made some changes in my plus to skills and I didn't calculate things out right, but I have 20 points in it. You only need level 25. That is the highest that you need to go to cap out Conviction. And I could save 5 points there, or actually 6 points there, if I pulled those points out and left it at level 25, as opposed to level 31, which is what it's currently at. You don't need level 31. On top of this, I do have to build the synergies. So I ended up putting 11 points in the rest of Resist Fire. I ended up putting 6 points into Resist Cold, and I ended up putting 12 points into Resist Lightning. Now, obviously, I'm only level 91, so I still have a couple levels to go before I really kind of cap out on skill points. And you always want to make sure you put them in evenly. I was probably planning on putting my next point into Resist Fire. And the reason why you want to put them in evenly is because you get passive resistances from these. So you get a 5.5% passive additional max fire resistance from having this. And if I put one more point, it would be 6. And then this one is 3. And this one is an additional 6, and so forth and so on. And then I also have 1 point in Salvation. So 12 points in Resist Lightning, 6 points in Resist Cold, and 11 points in Resist Fire. And you might be wondering why the hell I put them in unevenly like this. Well, before Sunder Charms, I would always consider certain resistances as unbreakable and others as breakable. Cold, which the reason why Cold has only 6 and the rest of them have a lot higher, is because Cold is almost always unbreakable in just about all scenarios. Even with Maximum Conviction, most of the time when you come across cold immune monsters, they're not breakable. Very rarely will you come across a cold immune monster that can actually be broken. And here's the interesting thing. Because Vengeance is literally 4 elements, most monsters stand no chance against your damage output. It doesn't matter whether you break them or not, but as you can see with these immune to cold monsters, they don't break. So I ended up putting less points into the cold synergy because the cold damage was the least useful in terms of immune monsters. But the thing is that on this particular character, you're dishing out so much additional damage in terms of elemental. And when you look at Vengeance, you really kind of get an idea. It does 380% fire, 330% cold, and 390% lightning. And on top of that, it also does a pretty hefty amount of physical damage as well. If I were to switch over to my regular attack, you see I'm still dishing out 2,294 physical damage, basically, with a couple other like cold items and things like Raven Frost adding into that. But for the most part, that's pure physical. Which means that when you look at my Vengeance skill is made up of 3 different elements and then physical on top of it. So you divide that by 4 is generally how you do this. So if you want to figure out what your damage is, and of course mine isn't equally distributed, but 8,442 divided by 4 gives me a total of 2,110 damage in each category. So I'm looking at 2,110 physical, 2,110 fire, 2,110 cold, 2,110 lightning, which means that anytime I come across any kind of monster in this game, doesn't really matter what it is or what immunities they have, the Vengeance Paladin doesn't care. The Vengeance Paladin walks up to a monster, breaks any immunity that they have with the exception of cold, rips away all of the resistances they have in other resistance categories, and hits them in the face with an attack that does all of the elements of damage in one hit, which just literally annihilates them. Now, granted, the main downside to this character is that he is such a single target character. He is horribly single target. And attack rating has always been an issue with this particular character on certain monsters. Now, when you use Conviction, you get negative 95% to the enemy's defense, which does mean that most monsters are relatively easy to hit. However, when you're fighting like bosses and Ubers and things like that that have ridiculously high defense already, and negative target's defense is actually halved when you are attacking bosses. So my negative 95% becomes, what is that, 47.5. So 47.5% instead of 95%, which means I need more attack rating to hit monsters like Ubers and bosses and things like that in general. So one of the things that I ended up having an issue with was not damage output, because the character puts out lots of damage. I had more of an issue with hitting the target. especially the Ubers, which is one of the reasons why I have the swap in here so that I can throw this on so I can smite the Ubers down. And also one of the reasons why when you saw this character, he was using Drekkul's Grasp, because in situations where I was utilizing Smite, I was relying on the overall, life tap procking thing to keep me alive. All in all, this character was not a failure. It was an absolutely amazing character. It's not my personal best character, but it is one of my favorites, and there's a reason why it's still one of my favorites regardless. It is so tanky. Oh god, it is so tanky. Building these right here makes your character have much higher maximum resistances than pretty much any other character. And if you build all of these properly, you can literally just get like 95% to all resistances. In combination with the Guardian Hellforge plate, having 95 all res made this character just like a god tank in terms of what he could sustain. And I remember one time the entire Uber group had died, and I was sitting there surrounded by players 8 frickin' pit lords, and the pit lords were just all trying to burn me to death with their infernos. And honestly, I just kind of stood there and laughed. I was in the center of the entire group of these monsters, and they couldn't touch me. They couldn't hit me because my defense was too high. I was blocking any of the attacks that did make it through the defense. And on top of that, I had more resistances than anybody could even frickin' hope to have. I would switch to Salvation Aura whenever I needed to cap out all my res, and literally I sat at 95, 95, 93, 95. And of course I could cap that out even further. On top of this, I really, really enjoy the fact that there is literally nothing in the game that this guy can't kill. If you want a character that can literally kill anything, that has absolutely no care in the world about what he's fighting or what she's fighting, this Vengeance Paladin can do that. Ubers, he kills them. Uber Tristram, he kills them. Uber Diablo, Pandemonium Diablo, he kills them. Like, Uber Lilith, Uber Iswal, Uber frickin' Duriel, whatever. He just knocks them down. It's not really even that big of a deal. The only one that he ever had an issue with, and this is actually kind of funny, is Uber Mephisto. And the reason why he had a problem with Uber Mephisto is because of the Conviction aura canceling. So when you fight Mephisto, Conviction cancels out the other Conviction of the appropriate level. So if he has level 20 Conviction, and I have level 31 Conviction, then his level 20 cancels out 20 levels of mine, and I have level 11 Conviction left. And since the attack rating, or the negative defense, is something that's so ingrained in the way that this character works, because my negative defense was suddenly gone when fighting Uber Mephisto, I found myself in a scenario where I couldn't hit him. Of course, he couldn't hit me either, and it was very difficult for him to do any damage to me whatsoever, but I was having trouble doing damage to him with Vengeance. And that's one of the reasons why I ended up doing a little swap to for the Smite with the Flesh Ripper, so that I could finish off Mephisto and then move on to the next, Uber boss. I think that's pretty much it with this guy. In the Conviction Vengeance world, there is so much confusion, and for those of you who really want to learn how to use this skill, I highly recommend that you go and you watch my video on Vengeance. I explain everything about Vengeance, what works with it, what doesn't work with it, one of the things that I will say in this video is a lot of people get really excited about adding in elemental damage to their Vengeance. Vengeance is not an elemental damage ability. I know. It's weird, right? It says fire, cold, and lightning on it, but the way that Vengeance function is it is a physical damage ability, okay? The only way you increase the damage of Vengeance is to increase your physical damage. Increasing your physical damage increases the damage that Vengeance does massively. As I showed you guys earlier with War Travs, when you take off War Travs that have this little 15 to 25 extra damage on it, look at how much damage is added. 8,000 to 8,400. 400 total damage is added just by adding a tiny little bit. Just 25 additional maximum damage and 15 additional minimum damage. 25 is the equivalent of 400. So when you think about adding, like, for instance, a 3 max damage 18 AR charm or something that dishes out lightning damage, you definitely want to go with the 3 max damage, because the 3 max damage is always going to add more than elemental damage will. The 10 max damage is always going to add more than the elemental damage will. And it's really just because of the way that Vengeance calculates its damage out is a physical damage skill. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my GGM Convicter, the Vengeance Paladin. And if you ever want to make your own Vengeance Paladin and you have questions, feel free to ask him. I will do my best to answer, and I'll try not to get frustrated. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, though. Vengeance is one of those abilities that I even got frustrated with. So if you're a brand new player, I definitely would not recommend choosing Vengeance. It's definitely one of those advanced abilities that you really only want to start messing with once you really start to understand the mechanics of the game. As always, thanks for watching, and keep watching.